Theories of International Relations. Realism. In this video, the following aspects of realism will be explained in detail. Introduction. Realism is the oldest school of thought in international relations and has a long and distinguished history. The factors on which realists focus most attention are the state and the international system. For most realists, states are the main actors that pursue their national interests in an anarchical system. This system is different from domestic system because there is no absolute power to control the behavior of states. The main proponents of realism are Thucydides, 16th century Italian philosopher Machiavelli, 17th century English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, and German-American jurist Hans Morgenthau. Main points of realism. Number 1. Selfish nature of humans. According to realism, people are by nature selfish and compete with others for dominance and self-advantage. The focus on gain and greed is one of the reasons why morality cannot play a role in relations among states. Similarly, Machiavelli has the same views about people. He writes in his book The Prince, people in general are ungrateful, fickle, and deceitful, eager to avoid dangers, and avid for gain, and while you are useful to them they are all with you, offering you their blood, their property, and their sons so long as danger is remote, but when it approaches they turn on you. Number 2. States promote their national interests. According to realists, all states seek to promote their national interests. The primary obligation of every state is to acquire power in order to promote their national interests. According to them, power is the most important currency in international politics. A state's philosophical or ethical preferences are neither good nor bad. What matters is whether they serve its self-interest. Thucydides writes, the standard of justice depends on the equality of power to compel. The strong do what they have the power to do and the weak accept what they have to accept. Number 3. World politics is struggle for power. There is a continuous struggle for power among states in the international politics. This instinct for struggle of power cannot be eradicated. In the words of Thomas Hobbes, a war of all against all. Economic growth is also important primarily as a means of acquiring and expanding state power and is less relevant to national security than is military might. Number 4. International anarchy and security dilemma. Security dilemma refers to the tendency of states to view the defensive arming of adversaries as threatening, causing them to arm in response. According to realists, when a state sees its adversary increasing its power, then it also seeks more power, and this is the security dilemma. In a system where there is no absolute power over states, every state increases its power. When other states observe the states increasing their power, they also try to increase their own power. Number 5. The balance of power. Balance of power is a theory which explains that peace and stability are most likely to be maintained when military power is distributed to prevent a single power from becoming a superpower. When all states seek to increase their power, stability is maintained through the balance of power. Power can be increased either internally or externally. Internally, a state can increase its power by building more and more armaments. For instance, nuclear arsenals have become the most important tool in today's world for gaining military power. Externally, the power can be increased by making alliances with other states. For instance, NATO and Warsaw Pact during the Cold War. Variants of realism. There are various variants of realism which include classical realism, neo-realism, offensive realism and defensive realism. These are explained in the given table. Number 1. Classical realism. Classical realism focuses on the sources and uses of national power and the problems that leaders encounter in their conduct of foreign policy. They focus on how a state can gain power. The power in the ancient times was only regarding military power, for example, the number of soldiers, etc. Number 2. Structural realism. Structural realism, often referred to as defensive realism to distinguish it from offensive realism. Defensive realism states that a state's primary objective is the preservation of power rather than expansion of power. Offensive realism on the other hand states that in an anarchical international system, a state should always seek to increase its power. Evolution of realism. Realism is the product of a long historical and philosophical tradition. Its history can be traced back to Greek times. Number 1. Thucydides. Greek historian Thucydides wrote History of the Peloponnesian War. In this book, he explains the reasons behind the war between Athens and Sparta. Thucydides has explained 4 concepts which are still relevant in realism. Number 1. State is the primary actor. According to Thucydides, state is the principal actor in war and in politics. The same view is shared by today's realists, although other actors, such as international institutions, may participate, their impact on the system is marginal. Number 2. State as a unitary actor. The state is assumed to be a single entity. Thucydides argues that once a state decides to go to war or capitulate, no subnational actors try to overturn the government's decision or subvert the state's interests. The state acts as a single entity. Number 3. States as rational actors. States are assumed to be rational actors. In other words, they make decisions by weighing the costs and benefits of various options against the goal to be achieved. Thucydides admitted that potential impediments to rational decision-making exist, including wishful thinking by leaders, confusing intentions and national interests. However, the core notion that leaders use rational decision-making processes to pursue the national interest remains. Realists argue that states act the same way that Thucydides assumed leaders do. Rational decisions are used to advance the interests of the state.